Hi there, I'm Steven with WatchGuard Capital, and in this video I'm going to recommend my top 10 ideas on how to fix the tax code. Because the tax gap, which is the amount of unpaid taxes per year, is estimated to be over $600 billion now, and one of the many reasons our national debt is exploding. I've been working on solving our national debt and long-term obligation issues for over 3 years, and if you want to support this effort, hit subscribe or become a Patreon. But for now, here are my top 10 ideas on how to fix our tax code and close the tax gap. Number 10. Modernize the IRS's tax software. Why is this important? Because the IRS's Individual Master File System, or IMF, that is used to process hundreds of millions of tax returns was created in the 1960s, like before the moon landing 1960s, and asking the IRS to protect honest tax-paying citizens from dishonest tax-evading ones with software from the 1960s is insane. We live in modern times that require modern technology. So number 10, modernize the IRS's tax software. Number 9, allow the IRS to enforce minimum competency standards. You have to have a license to remove someone's heart, manage someone's finances, and even sell a hot dog in our country. What you don't need a license to do is prepare someone's taxes. So let's fix that and make sure tax preparers have a minimum level of understanding of our tax code before they can file a tax return. Number 8, increase IRS budgets. If you saw Tax Gaps Parts 1 and 2, you know that we have historically high levels of tax fraud right now. What we don't have is historic levels of support for the IRS. On a 2021 constant dollar basis, the IRS's budget fell almost every year between 2012 and 2021, and the number of full-time employees fell from 90,000 to 80,000, even though both the population of the United States and the complexity of our tax code grew every year. We need to fix that. So number 8, increase IRS budgets. Number 7, simplify our tax code. We spend a lot of time, money, and energy reviewing our elected political leaders every couple years, but not the tax deductions and loopholes they pass while in office. In this video, I explored the idea of capping the total allowable deductions taken by Americans at a percentage of the previous year's tax collections. So instead of letting America's financial sustainability die by 1,000 tax cuts, let's simplify our tax code and reduce the influence lobbyists have in DC. So number 7, simplify our tax code. Number 6, increase electronic filings. If we modernize our IRS tax software and we reduce the complexity of our tax code, there's no reason we couldn't get to the point where we could do our taxes on our cell phones in a couple minutes. It's probably still a good idea to allow the average tax return to be submitted by paper for free for Americans who refuse to embrace technology. But anyone with a complicated tax return purposely filing a paper tax return to reduce the chances of an audit should have to pay per page to cover the cost of scanning, reviewing, and filing it. So number 6, increase electronic filings. Number 5, require financial institutions to report aggregate account information for large accounts. Now, some people will be quick to say that this is an invasion of privacy, but I didn't say transaction information would be remitted, just aggregate information. So if a couple earn $250,000, they may have $170,000 of net inflows into their account after taxes were paid. And if they spent $170,000 on goods, services, and savings, that's their business, and the IRS doesn't need to know about what they spent it on. But if they made $2 million and didn't report it to evade taxes, that is the IRS's business. And I don't want my taxes going up because someone didn't want to pay theirs. So any account with aggregate in or outflows over some agreed upon amount gets reported to the IRS to compare with the corresponding tax returns. So number 5, require financial institutions to report aggregate account information for large accounts. Number 4, provide free IRS tax concierges to our wealthiest citizens. Our tax system is unnecessarily complex, and there are a lot of gray areas, and hiring accountants and lawyers is expensive. We need to free up our wealthiest top 0.01% of citizens to create jobs. So instead of auditing them, let's give them free personal tax concierges, or maybe a team of them to assist in filing their tax returns. Our wealthy citizens benefit because they get complimentary tax reporting services at no cost and no chance of a time-consuming audit. And all Americans benefit because the non-reporting of foreign income, improper political contributions, and tax fraud would decrease. Number 3, raffle off pools of tax returns to be audited by private agencies. If you didn't like my idea to provide free IRS tax concierges to our wealthiest citizens, or to expand IRS budgets to modernize and expand its capabilities because you're anti-government, then this idea is for you. The problem with our current tax system is that accountants and tax preparers are often being paid to creatively interpret and circumnavigate the intent of our tax code, and the IRS has one hand tied behind its back because of budget cuts. So to kill 2 birds with 1 stone and align these 2 groups' efforts, which should be the proper reporting and payment of taxes, we could turn the process of auditing tax returns over to the private sector, which could work like this. The IRS takes 25,000 random tax returns and scrubs all personal information from them. It then auctions off the right to audit this pool of tax returns to private accounting firms. We probably don't want private auditors contacting private citizens about suspected tax fraud, so the IRS would still handle the investigation and collection processes. But a percentage of any taxes collected by the IRS would be paid back to the accounting firms that initially discovered the fraud as a finder's fee. Now, I don't actually think this is a good idea, or one that would ever be implemented, and I only presented it for the individuals watching this video who will have objected to every idea that I have presented thus far, but failed to provide one of their own on how to address our expanding tax fraud and national debt issues. So number 3, the satirical bluff for the anti-government and true capitalist, raffle off pools of tax returns to be audited by private agencies. Number 2, treat all sources of income the same by the federal government. So whether someone earns rental, wages, tips, salary, commissions, ordinary, passive, trade, portfolio, royalties, business, partnership, dividends, capital gains, interest, or any other label you want to attach to income, just treat it uniformly as income received by an American that is available to them for the pursuit of happiness, whatever that might be. Number 2, treat all sources of income the same by the federal government. And my number 1 idea, implement a 2-lever unified flat tax system. Reducing tax code complexity and tax fraud were common themes woven throughout the ideas presented in this video, which would go a long way towards solving our national debt and long-term obligation issues. But Congress has known about the magnitude of our tax fraud for over 20 years based on the tax gap reports it received and did little to address it. So I propose that we as the people endow Congress with a 2-lever tax system, which I explain in depth in parts 1, 2, and 3 of the Flat Tax series, but this is basically how it would work. We as a society decide on and establish a base amount that a person can earn before paying any federal taxes, so that lower income earners and young adults just starting out can focus on their own financial problems like housing, healthcare, and food. And let's assume that amount is $18,000 for a single person and double that amount for married couples. So this is the first lever we have given Congress, the one that controls the amount of income that can be earned before someone has to pay federal taxes. And thus, Congress has 3 options with the first deduction lever. It could increase it so that everyone pays less in taxes. It could decrease it so that everyone pays more in taxes, or it could not change it at all. But it's the same threshold for everyone, regardless of how you earned your income, and thus it's absolutely fair across the board. And individuals wouldn't be able to reduce their taxes by contributing to political parties anymore, at least at the federal level. But that's how the first deduction lever would work. So let's take a look at the second lever, the tax rate lever. Let's assume Congress declares a flat tax rate of 30% that will be levied on all income above the tax-free deduction amount. Here are 5 hypothetical single Americans earning 5 hypothetical incomes. All of them don't have to pay federal tax on the first $18,000 set by the tax deduction lever, and any dollars above that threshold are taxable at 30%. So those are the amounts that they would have to pay in federal taxes, and those are their effective tax rates. Note that this flat tax system produces a progressive tax system from 0 to 30% depending on one's income, which is interesting because that means you don't need higher and higher marginal tax rates to achieve a progressive tax system, which is something that only became apparent to me after doing this research. And because the tax rate is the same for everyone, it would still be absolutely fair across the board. Once the deduction and tax rate levers were set for the first time, we would know what our base tax system was. And if there was unacceptable deficits, national debt, or inflation, we would know how much spending had to be cut or how much tax rates would have to be increased to resolve the issue. In essence, we would have a regulator on government spending, which we currently do not have. The problem now is that the right spent too much on tax cuts and deductions without forcing the left to rein in spending outlays, which was reckless by the right. And the left spent too much on spending outlays without forcing the right to rein in tax cut act, which was reckless by the left. And all that reckless behavior is now generating an unsustainable financial path with unacceptable inflation, and it will get worse until we as Americans rein in these 2 political parties that are recklessly spending time that we don't have. So those are my top 10 ideas to fix our tax code, close the tax gap and reduce fraud, and reestablish a spending governor on our federal government to bring an end to reckless spending on tax concessions to special interest groups and political donors, a blind idea fraud, and our time. I'm Stephen Paluga with WatchGuard Capital. Invest your time wisely and vote for me if or when we have no other option but for me to run for office.